thing you need to learn and understand about Magna Carta 1215, it's this. Magna Carta 1215 is the sole peaceful means known to humankind by which the rights of the weakest, most innocent citizens can prevail over a massive, potentially corrupt and oppressive state power. This is the voice of freedom, Magna Carta 1215 Learning Centre. Welcome to your next lesson with hosts Fitzroy and Carl. Well, good evening, folks. Welcome along to the Magna Carta Learning Centre and lesson number 3. Fitzroy Sterling joins me. Good evening, Fitz. How are you, my friend?
Doing wonderful, actually. So, yeah, I'm keen as always, every week to get started and get into it. Just wanted to mention the Project Matilda again. I know you mentioned it last week, but that's obviously something I want to focus people's attention to, where they come and hear us as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Project Matilda's going great guns. If you haven't already joined up, please do so. ProjectMatilda.com. Free to register. It's a bit like a Facebook. It's a bit like a Gab. And the more people we get joining it, the better and bigger and broader the community will be. They're really enjoying what we're doing with Magna Carta 1215 over there. And, of course, it is completely uncensored. You can speak a lot of truth there and not get blocked. I noticed that we are not streaming to as many channels as we normally would tonight, Fitz. Comments have obviously been made somewhere that have made me unusable in Facebook and YouTube land. So I do apologize if you are not seeing this on your normal channel, but we got it up on 3 and it'll be up on 4 by the time Project Matilda gets loaded up a little later on tonight. So what are we into tonight then, mate?
Yeah, so we're going to go into, obviously, the court system again, going to really look into how the whole governmental structure is meant to be versus to how it is now. So we're going to go really, pretty solidly deep into it to really help people's understanding so they can really stand in their power and understand how they can claim their power back. So, yeah, we're just going to repeat it, but just with a lot more depth. So I'm ready to go when you are, my friend.
All right, then. Let's get into it with the first slide, then. This one is Order of Creation.
So what we might do is I might quickly go over this and then we'll go play those 2 videos and then we'll come back into this as well. But just to start, as you can see at the top, it's got natural law. And so natural law, some people call it divine law, some people call it universal law, some call it God's law. There's different terms for it. But that's just the set of conditions that exist by which everything interacts with one another on this planet and throughout the cosmos. And that goes through different realms, like the spiritual realm as well. And then below that is the rule of law. So the rule of law means that natural law rules. That's pretty much it. And then we just interpret that with our best effort through our conscience. And that's how we come up with common law. So that which is common to all of us. And that's just man's best interpretation of how nature rules over us, if that makes sense. And then below that, we the people exist, obviously, because we exist in nature. And so we're top of the human realm. And as you can see over to the right-hand side, it says head of state. So that I'll cover later, just to give it more depth. But now I just want to gloss past that, just so you can just clock that it's there. And below that, because we live in a very sophisticated society, we need to create some kind of structure that helps serve those sophisticated and complex needs. And so that we create government to do that. And they have a specific function to carry out. And that function they carry out requires some kind of governance, and that's what legislation is there for, not to be used against us. And then below government, there is the actual people who will serve in those positions, and they're the politicians, public servants. And they need to take an oath to make sure that they're actually going to abide by those standards and those rules and the conditions that are set for them to carry out their function. So that's kind of just a really fast track, and we'll go into that deeper. But if we can start with those videos that I had set up, we'll go and that'll help sort of build this out a bit more, and then we'll come back to this and I'll explain it again.
Okay, so you might have to give me a minute here because, yeah, for some reason or other, they're just not loading at the moment, mate. So just give me a minute.
Oh, too easy.
I'll have a fiddle here and try and figure out why they're not loading.
So as you can see with the head of state, I might just explain that now while we're waiting. It says it's equal to the people. Well, it's the head of state is equal to the people when the man or woman who is in that office, so in America that's called the president, in a constitutional monarchy that's called a monarch, which I don't actually like that term. I'd much prefer to call them the office holder of sovereign. So the man or woman who sits in that office, who has been elected into that position, would need to be elected by the people only if the people have full confidence that they have divine knowledge, a really solid knowledge of natural law, and then law of the land, which is common law. That being the rules and the customs we already live by, that was codified into an agreement between the people and those that we elect into our service, which otherwise is known as a constitution. And so government exists because of a constitution, and so government cannot write a constitution. So that point really needs to be really clearly understood. So anything that has been written by government is not a constitution. So I don't know if I can make that any clearer. A constitution can only be written as a representation of what the people already choose to live by, the rules, the customs, traditions, to reflect that. And inside anything that is a constitution, there would be a mechanism by which the people can make sure that they reign supreme over their creation, that being government. So government can never rule us, that we always can rule them, because we created government and the people who serve in government to serve us. So we created that role that people take, and it's the people who actually have honourable intentions would take that position. Now, because if you don't have an accountability structure, then you're going to get people of the opposite, right? You're going to have people who are narcissists and sociopaths who will take those positions because they know there's no accountability. And so that's why in a constitution, that would be enshrined, that there is a specific mechanism by which that can never be breached. And so that's some of the things that we'll cover tonight about what that is. So back into the head of state, they are equal to the people only when they're in their capacity as a man or a woman, like just you and I are. But when they're the head of state, they're actually below us because their position was created by us, so they can't be above us. So just to clarify why that line is there, as like people are equal to the head of state, it's only as them as a man or woman in their private capacity, because they're one of the people. Or in their official capacity, they're actually below the people, because we are the sovereigns. We are the ones who are above the rulership or control of another. The head of state is not, because that's a fictional creation. Same with government and all the people who take oaths while they stay in that official capacity. They are below us in that order of hierarchy, in that hierarchy of creation. So are we any closer to getting those videos up, Carl? No, I think I've lost him.
Right, so sorry, mate. No, unfortunately, you've sent them to me in a file format that this system doesn't like at the moment, so I've got to try and convert them. I didn't realise this was the case.
Well, we might just go into the next slide then, while that happens.
Get into that.
All right, so this will explain what I was saying a moment ago a little better. So in the previous videos, if you watched them, I had this set out differently. And I've redone it just to give it more clarity so people can really see how the true nature of the system we were meant to live under actually works. So you can see the word rule of law, and that means no one is above the law. So what happened in 1215 was that the monarch at the time was actually acting outside the law. He was actually harming his people. He had his band of mercenaries actually causing serious harm to people. Like, we're talking mutilation. He was having them mutilated. And not only that, he was taxing them out of existence, seizing their lands, taking their wives. It was just off the charts what he was doing. And so it got to the point where even the barons went, wow, this is going to threaten our livelihood. So they were his peers, they were his equals. And so they brought him in to heel, and they needed to show him they were serious, so they seized London, and that's what brought him to the table. And being he was the Pope's inside man, he was never just going to go, oh, okay, you got me. Obviously, he was never going to keep to the agreement, but he still sealed it, and that's enough. That's all we needed, was the fact that it was sealed by the head of state at the time. And so the true nature of the setup is, as you can see here, the people are equal to the trial by jury system, because that is our mechanism. So that is the mechanism by which we are in charge of all the fictional creations that we created to serve us. So as you can see, it says trial by jury, and there's a jury of 12 and a convener. So it doesn't say the word judge in there. It only says convener. So how it works is that the head of state, they have power over the legislature. And so the legislature is that governing body that we have that is meant to be able to organize the assets that we have and like the resources and our labor to be able to create infrastructure, to deliver services, obviously jobs as well as part of that, and extract resources in a way that makes sure that we all live to a certain standard of quality that's equal to our neighbour. That's the actual function of government and parliament. Now, as people are listening to this, I'm sure everyone's just shaking their heads going, how is that? What? When's that ever happen? That's because there was no accountability, because trial by jury has been removed. Ever since 1215 was sealed, they spent as much effort as they could in taking that away from people's consciousness. And so originally they were putting like what you call conditions, you know, like by how you could be a jury member. And what they did is they made it that you had to be a landowner. So a landowner is going to be very sympathetic to anything the government does because they're of the same class. So they already started stacking the juries, and they pretty much removed the everyday man from ever being able to serve in a jury. So already they were, you know, influencing how decisions were being made. So that didn't take long for them to start doing that. But the true nature was that we, the people, are the ones who are in charge, because anything that the government creates as far as legislation, it cannot breach those 4 tenets of common law. And that's what the head of state is sworn to protect. So that's why they have a coronation oath if it's a monarchy, constitutional monarchy. And if it's a presidency, it's the oath, I think the inauguration oath. It's pretty much the same thing. And that is that they're swearing to protect the people's sovereignty. And that is those 4 tenets of no loss, harm, keeping the peace, and committing no fraud. They must make sure that they hold that in trust, and that we trust them to do that. So if the head of state, once the legislature is passed by the upper and the lower house, it comes up to the head of state, and then they get to check it against their coronation oath, right? What they swore to protect, and that is our sovereignty. And if they can't see that it's going to be a breach of anyone's liberties, they can see that it's actually going to advance our quality of life, then they're meant to allow it to pass. So when they allow it to pass, that sits what we call in probation. So it's temporarily passed as law, but now it needs to be tested in the community. So the community, you know, it goes out into the community and it comes into force. And then we see if any member of the community is actually caught in breach of that new legislation. And if they are, then they come stand before the trial by jury, before a jury of 12. And they come, you know, and they call the accused, right? And then the jury of 12, which is just their peers, their equals, people that live in the same community they come from. And they are the ones who will assess not so much whether they breached the legislation, but whether there was malicious intent. So the jury doesn't judge on the law itself, but it's the intention of the individual. And remember, they're not actually judging law. In this case, they're judging legislation, which is not law. So if you've watched the previous two, there should be a bit of clarity now between legislation and law. And so the whole idea of constitutional common law is that the highest priority goes to an innocent man or woman must remain free, right? So it's much better that if someone is actually guilty, but they're let free, because the community will know about them anyway, and that their just desserts will come up again, other than punishing someone who was innocent, right? Because that's our conscience at work. None of us who actually have one would ever want to do that to our fellow being, because they're just merely another life expression of the same life force that courses through our veins. So any suffering they go through is suffering to ourselves. So that's the kind of level of consciousness that you're working with in a trial by jury structure, that we all understand innately that we are connected to one another, that all life is interconnected. And so there's no such thing as any act that can stay in isolation. right? So every act has far-reaching consequences beyond ourselves. So we come into with that consciousness, and that's how we're making assessments and judgments based on whether we believe that accused is guilty or innocent. Now, if it's because of legislation that they're there, and there's a jury of 12 and it must be unanimous, so 11 of them could believe that the accused was guilty, that they had malicious intent to cause somebody harm by breaching that legislation, and the 12th one couldn't, just their conscience just couldn't let them, just, no, I can't do this. So then it's called a not guilty verdict. So it must be unanimous. Now the convener, they're not a judge. All they are is someone who brings, so their job is to find the jury, and instruct them on matters of law, of constitutional law, if they don't understand it, and run the proceedings so they're actually running smoothly. They also get to decide whether there was any reason, like a valid reason for the accused to be there, so they're not wasting the jury's time. So that's about it. And they can also, I think they can strike off a sentence, but they can't actually add one.
Right.
Now, don't quote me on that. That was just a bit of a rough, really faint memory I have. So I need to read up on that just to be clear on that. Now, did you want to say something, Carl?
I've got no good news for you on your videos, unfortunately. For technical reasons, they will not be joining us this evening.
Bugger. All right. Well, lucky I've got these slides here.
Indeed. On to the next one.
Well, actually, let me go back to that one and just finish off. Sure. So that's the proceeding. And now if the accused is found not guilty, and I remember it only takes one jury member, then what happens is that it must be the legislation that is the source of harm, loss, or a breach of the peace, or an act of fraud. So then the jury is oath bound to annul that piece of legislation. So now their role is to strike it off the statute books. Now, once they do that, then there's the last part of the Trinity, which is common law private prosecution. And that means that any member of parliament whose name was on the bill that became that piece of legislation, that was the reason why one of the members of the community was brought before the jury, and it was assessed as being unjust, well, those members of parliament can now be privately prosecuted by any member of the community for free. Because remember, we said that there cannot be any loss, harm, breach of the peace, or fraud committed against any member of the community, because that's the highest priority. Well, if their legislation is the source of that, well, they've taken an oath to protect the people's liberty, and their breach of it, well, then some serious consequences are coming for them. And so you can see the arrow goes down here, the executive and the police, right? They get directed by us, the jury, not the head of state, not the legislature. It's us, through what we decide is fair, because you can't have government policing us, because they're our creation. If they're going to create legislation that's going to affect us, well, we need to be able to decide whether that's fair, and just. And only then, if we decide it's fair and just, then a community member can be prosecuted. But if we can't see that it's fair and just, well, then no, they get prosecuted for creating something that's unjust. And the penalties are pretty severe. They're not light. Because
which would stop them from creating laws like we're fighting today that seem to be laws to aid government or to help those within government rather than to help us, the people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's more than that. It's the people behind government that we don't get to see, that sit in the shadows. That's who they're creating the legislation for. So now today, actually legislation, all of it, is a source of crime. It's actually a transgression of natural law. That's what legislation is used for, because there was no accountability structure. And that's why people who go into government, who go into the priesthood, who go into the police, who go into in positions of CEOs or any hospital or, bureaucracy, I mean, you name it, they're all running off the same structure, and that is that they seek to dominate others. It's only going to appeal to those kind of people. It's not an accident. And it's only because that accountability factor has been removed. Now, once that's reinstated, you will never get that kind of personality ever showing up to these positions. Because why would they? Because not only the penalties that are waiting for them are going to be so extreme, but it actually wipes out everything they've accumulated in that process up until that point. So all their assets are gone. So if their whole modus operandi is to pass on their wealth to their heirs, so the heirs can carry on and keep doing what they've done, well, there's no opportunity for that because it's just wiped out. And so there's nothing to appeal to them in any way, shape, or form. You would only get honourable people taking these positions as it was meant to be. So that's kind of the real power here. And that's what the rule of law actually means. But when you hear people say that and they don't define it like this, you've got to start suspecting what they actually mean. And one of the meanings of alternative meanings of rule of law is actually rule of nations. That's what the bar has created that meaning to mean. And so it's really important that when people are using terms that they define it. If they don't, you've got to start asking questions about what's their interpretation that I might be missing. And so that's why I was just wanting to make a point of really expanding on this understanding of the rule of law, because that's really, really key for people to understand that. And then they can see what the police are actually doing, that they're not enforcing the rule of law. They're not even close. They're enforcing private corporate policy.
Yep, absolutely.
So, yeah, we can move on to the next one. All right, so just a little bit more clarity around trial by jury. So it's law of the land through trial by jury provides the people with protection through the jurors' power to judge the justice of politicians and bureaucrats, and also measures of finance and law. So that's another thing, right? A lot of people don't know that we actually get to decide what these politicians and bureaucrats, how they believe that they're going to use our money. So could you imagine that power? Like, if you really think about that, that's mind-blowing. I'm guessing that's going to blow people's minds, that that's actually its true nature, for us to actually have control over how our money's used.
I just wonder how that would be. I wonder how that would be put into use. Like how that would be exercised in reality. It's nice to say, but I wonder how we would exercise that.
Well, there's a lot of people out there who've got a lot more knowledge than me that would probably have a better answer than I would right now. So I just wanted to put in that actual understanding that that's actually what's at play. I haven't read up on every aspect. There's so much reading to do. So when I catch up to that part, I'll be able to answer that question. But right now, I'd be making it up, so I'm not willing to do that.
No, fair is fair.
We can move to the next one. Yep. Trial by jury, the people judge the very legality of their government when necessary, overseeing and scrutinising the issuance of currency and credit. So that goes into that a little bit, what we just spoke about. Yeah. Condemning usury, all money lending and interest, and fractional reserve lending, fraud at common law. So you want to think about that, right? What do our banks run off? They run off fractional reserve lending, which is actually fraud at common law. So if we actually had the 1215 Magna Carta in place, none of us would have any credits, debts, nothing like that. Could you imagine that? Like, this is really big to really sit with this one. All right? So there would be no reserve banking, there'd be none of this fractional reserve, there'd be no fiat currency. It would all need to be backed by something of value, and it would be issued by the Treasury Department, and there's none of this paying it back for interest business. And they did that.
The currency would need to be backed by gold or precious metals.
Yes. And that's what.
And every person has a certain number associated with their sovereignty, wealth fund, I suppose, the sovereign wealth fund.
Well, yeah, that's a collective fund, the sovereign wealth fund. But if you needed, let's say, if you needed money to build something like a house or purchase something, you wouldn't be paying it back with interest. Yeah. You would just pay it back, but you wouldn't be paying it back with interest. So you'd be getting some kind of wage that was quite livable. So whatever you paid back wouldn't be a massive chunk out of your life. So you wouldn't be suffering. And then you'd have a lot more money to buy stuff, and then so the economy booms because you can purchase a lot more things than you can, and you're not living, in squalor. Houses aren't these ridiculous prices. There isn't this massive gap in how, houses in this suburb and that suburb. That just wouldn't exist. That's absurd, right? So you just got to imagine all this stuff that's happening with property, right? That just wouldn't exist. It'd be like a really achievable amount, and so you're not going to spend the rest of your life trying to pay off a house, because that's an innate right of all of us to have a warm place to, shelter where we can feel safe. So this is a condition of life that we require to have equality. So that would never be taxed like that. This would be an innate right that would be protected. That's the true nature of how we were supposed to live. But what they did, these criminals, they took that very thing that we require for equality of life, and they made it so unachievable. But they know everyone needs it. So you think about that, right? You've got yourself a colony of like good slaves that are just going to be there forever, and they're going to die.
Workers.
Yeah, they're going to be just bound to this. Yeah, so you can see why they really clutched onto this and made sure trial by jury couldn't exist, because that just ruined all their plans if it ever did, right? So they couldn't. There's no way they could accumulate the wealth they have and the concentrated power they have. It just wouldn't have happened. So all these people that hide in the shadows, their bloodlines would be extinguished the way they run them now. They just wouldn't happen. They'd be just average people like you and me. And they can't have that, right? Because these people believe they're gods. So they had to get rid of this. So hopefully that gives a little bit more depth to the power of trial by jury. So what are we up to here? Constitutional common law criminalises government borrowing at interest. So think about that. And banks from lending at interest. So there's another one for you, right? Constitutional restoration retroactively eliminates the national debt at a stroke. So let that one drop in your pocket and see how that feels. All right. So if we got our constitution back, eliminating the national debt like that, credit card gone, any loans that you've taken out gone. If in fact they'd be needing to, all the crims would need to pay you back for them stealing your time, energy, and labor through making you pay these interests. So you'd be up for a pretty big windfall if you've got a mortgage or a car loan or a credit card. I mean, there's so much that needs to be restored here. If you actually lost your house because of a foreclosure, all those years that, you spent trying to find somewhere else to live and all the losses that you suffered and the emotional damage that came to you because of that, right? That's all got to be restored, and that's got to come from somewhere. And these crims have accumulated so much wealth, there'd be more than enough to go around. So this is, if people really want some real incentive, I guess, have a look here how much different your life's going to be when that national debt is gone, because that's a fictional invention. That doesn't exist. They've just used it to control us and make sure that we stay good slaves. So yeah, that's why I thought that was going to be something really important that people might like to understand about the difference between what they think the Australian Constitution is, which is not a constitution, versus to what a real constitution is, so they can see the difference, because this one that people use to get their protection has none of these things in it. None of them.
Absolutely not. Yep.
And the people would never allow anything less. So now you can see why. So what's the next one? So at common law, the conveners, sheriffs, bailiffs, and other officers were elected by the people instead of being appointed by the king or the government. So you ever think about that?
Yeah.
Like the way it works today.
Yeah, it works similarly, I suppose, to a portion of how the American constitutional sheriffs work, in that they work outside the normal frame system of the American legal system. But this really dates back to, if you like, the Sheriff of Nottingham, even though he was a bad sheriff.
Yeah. And so if you think about that, like, we are the ones who would select these officers. So they're people we would trust who have really solid knowledge of natural law, because that's the first. If you don't understand natural law, you can't understand common law. So we'd pick, again, just like we'd choose a monarch that would do the same. We'd pick someone that we believed had that, that real solid knowledge. And so that would be the convener, the sheriff, the bailiff, and the judicial officers, so people who like court reporters and the people who do the actual paperwork and stuff. They'd all have to have that as a base level before they'd even be allowed to step into those spaces. And so then, only then, because they have that innate knowledge and we trust them, then they can choose the jurors. So it says, therefore, legal selection of jurors was done by officers elected by the people. So those officers now, they get to choose the jurors because we chose them. So it's just like we chose the monarch, who we trust, who then runs the government. It's the sort of same structure.
Sure.
I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does. And at the bottom it says, officers were never selected by the government. So I'll put never really big there, right? Bold. Never. Just like police are never selected by the government. And they're not police, actually. I keep confusing myself. I need to say constables.
Yeah.
So it's the same structure, always the same. It never changes. So once you see that there's only one way it's done, that applies across every aspect of anything to do with those officers that are acting in the service of us, we the people. It's always one structure. And that is about inherent knowledge and having integrity before they can even think about taking that position. And it's a position of honor, not what we have today.
Yeah.
So
that's right. It's a position of high esteem within the community. And I think even today in America, in little towns and in country areas, they still elect a sheriff, and he is elected from within their group, and they trust him. He's grown up in the group. In some cases, the whole family have been, sheriffs, for many years. So they've got great family history. That goes to show that they've been able to build that sort of strength and knowledge within the community and trust with the community too, which we seem to have lost with our modern day police force, so to speak.
Well, yeah, I mean, for starters, they're not selected by the people. That's your first one right there. That's a private recruitment agency, and they're working for the Vatican, right? So they're running Vatican rules. That's what they teach them. And and on top of that, they choose the personality test they set up, right? They're very cleverly done because they're going to get a very narrow selection of individuals who fall within that capacity that they're just smart enough to be able to hold a gun and walk and, do the basic functions, but they're dim enough to follow orders without question. And a stat that I just came across the other day was actually confirmed that. And that was out of the 20,000 police here in Victoria, only 120 ceased working for the Victoria Police once those jabs were mandated. Now, I did the maths on that. That's 0.006%.
Wow.
So that shows you just how good that personality test is.
My word.
So that's such a small amount that just went, hang on a second, I'm not doing that. And the rest just went, yeah, no worries. So these are very good order followers. Really solid. So they know what they're doing with their private recruitment. That's not an accident. So just before I go into this one, I did also, now I lost my train of thought, what I was going to say about that. I might come back to that. That's all right. So I found this when I put this on my Facebook page on the Soundbite University, if anyone wants to have a look at that. This one kept getting a lot of shares, so I thought I'd put it up here. Now, Justice James Wilson, he was a co-author of the American Constitution. Now, I don't want to get into that today because I've got my own ideas about that not being a legit constitution, but nevertheless, there's still something powerful about what he's written here. The empowerment of citizens by bestowing upon them judicial authority as jurors in trial by jury is which laws and measures passed by legislatorial majorities in the assembly could be judged, overruled and annulled whenever this was deemed by the jurors necessary to serve justice, liberty, and the interests of the people. So I'm really just showing you that this is not an invention. This is established custom and tradition of how we can actually have freedom. It can't be something we just leave to others. It needs to have us being in charge of it. And so that structure was always there. It just got hidden from us. And in the United States, they started down that path. And then obviously, just like everything else, it all gets eroded away year by year. And less people know about it. And before you know it, they're being ruled by their government just like everywhere else. So that's kind of really like a pivotal thing that I'm really making sure that this information just gets drilled into everyone so they really get what the power of trial by jury is. And, if you need to go rewatch this, then please go do it, because until this is really understood, there's not going to be a real understanding of how to get into the solution. This is like at the center of it. So that's why I've just gone really, full tilt in this pathway to really solidify the understanding of what government is and how we, the people, must be in charge of it. So if people don't understand that, then they sort of just take what they're told as truth. And so I wanted to just read something that I picked up today, which I thought was really important, because a lot of people confuse jury trials with trial by jury. And so I wanted to read something out about a jury trial. So if the government may dictate to the jury what laws they are to enforce, it is no longer a trial by country. Now, what country means is that the 12 people that would normally be in a trial by jury are meant to represent the country. So they would have people from different belief structures. You know, some might be more favourable to the government, others might not. But they need to have a cross-section. So that's why they call it trial by country. Sure. But a trial by government, but a trial by the government, because the jury then try the accused not by any standard of their own, not by their own judgments or their rightful liberties, but by a standard dictated to them by the government. And the standard thus dictated by the government becomes the measure of the people's liberties. So I'll say that again. And the standard thus dictated by the government becomes the measure of the people's liberties. And that's what a jury trial is. If the government dictate the standard of trial, it, of course, dictates the results of the trial. And such a trial is no trial by the country, but only a trial by the government. And in it, the government determines what are its own powers over the people. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Instead of the people determining what are their own liberties against the government, so that's what's meant to happen, right? We're meant to determine what are our liberties against the government. So in short, if the jury has no right to judge the justice of a law, which is really legislation, of the government, they plainly can do nothing to protect the people against oppressions of the government. For there are no oppressions which the government may not authorize by their law. And if you want to understand how everything's happened the way it has and where we are today, and if that doesn't sum it up, I'm not sure how else I could explain it. So they've tricked us, believing we have freedoms by putting these jury trials together. But they set the limits and the standards, and they dictate the whole thing.
What you can and can't hear, what's legal or what's admissible and what's inadmissible.
Exactly.
How many bad people have got off on a technicality?
Yeah, so I'll read a little bit more just to help clarify that. The jury must also judge of the laws of evidence. If the government can dictate to a jury the laws of evidence, it can not only shut out any evidence it pleases, tending to vindicate the accused. So it can shut out any evidence that's going to vindicate the accused. That's what the government gets to do. But it can require that any evidence whatever that it pleases to offer be held as conclusive proof of any offence whatever which the government chooses to allege. Did that make sense? Do I need to read that last part again?
Might have another go at that.
All right, so I'll read it again. I'll see if I can explain it in just lay words as well. So it says, but it can require that any evidence whatever that it pleases to offer. So the government, it says, can require that any evidence that it pleases to offer, whatever it likes, be held as conclusive proof. So they get to decide of what's going to be conclusive proof of whatever offence they're wanting to charge you with, that they want to allege that you're, in breach of.
Yep.
That's how they do it. And because we don't know any better, we just go, oh, well, these lawyers, they've gone to years of, law school, and so have these judges, and so they must know law better than us. No, they know the legal, which is a mind trick. So yes, that's what they know better than us, but not law. Now, if you've seen the first ones, I did define law. So hopefully you guys can remember what that means. It's got nothing to do with anything that's created in the mind. That's not law. So anything that's created in the mind, that's legislation. So I'll just read a bit more. It is manifest, therefore, that the jury must judge of and try the whole case, and every part and every parcel of the case, free of any dictation or authority on the part of government. They must judge of the existence of the law, of the true exposition of the law, of the justice of the law and of the admissibility and weight of all the evidence offered. Otherwise, the government will have everything its own way, which is what we have and we always have had. The jury will be mere puppets in the hands of the government. So that's what your jury trial is, guys.
Yeah.
And the trial will be, in reality, a trial by the government and not a trial by the country. By such trials, the government will determine its own powers over the people, instead of the people determining their own liberties against the government. Now, that's really important to understand. Right? So a jury trial is the government determining its own powers over us, where a trial by jury is where we determine our liberties against the government. And it will be an entire delusion to talk, as for centuries we have done, of trial by jury as a palladium of liberty, or as any protection to the people against the oppression and tyranny of the government. So basically it's a fantasy that we've been brought up on, that we have freedom. That's basically what that's saying. Because we don't understand the mechanisms by which freedom can actually prevail. And that's how they do it. They do it by us not understanding it, the technicalities of what's required. So I'll just read on a little bit more. The question then between trial by jury and thus described, which is the jury trial, which is really trial by government, is simply a question between liberty and despotism. The authority to judge what are the powers of the government and what the liberties of the people must necessarily be vested in one or the other of the parties themselves, the government or the people, because there is no third party to whom it can be entrusted. So you got to choose, right? Who do you want to have the power? Do you want it to be the government or do you want it to be the people? There's no fence to sit on. There's no third party. You need to pick a side, right? That's what this is saying. If the authority is vested in the government is absolute, and the people have no liberties except such as the government sees fit to indulge them with. That's what they've been doing this whole time. So all people who are proponents of the 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, that's what you've been doing. You've been being indulged by what the government allows you to have. That's why they call it privileges and benefits, because that's what that thing that you believe is the Constitution has given you. And anything that's a privilege or benefit can be taken away. Rights can't. That's how you know. There's your litmus test right there. If it's been taken away, it was never a right. It was a privilege and a benefit. So everyone whose ancestors did that referendum to vote for this, they voted for privileges and benefits. Because you can't vote for rights. That's not a thing. They just exist. So I'll just finish reading this. Then the people have all, so if, on the other hand, the authority be vested in the people, then the people have all liberties. They have all of them against the government, except such as substantially the whole people, through the jury, choose to disclaim. And the government can exercise no power except such as substantially the whole people, through a jury, consent that it may exercise. So what they're saying is if the jury decides that any of the government legislation is actually going to protect them, you know, better and enhance their life, then yeah, they'll allow it to go ahead if the accused was in breach of legislation and they can see there was malicious intent behind that individual's actions. So then they would pass that, they would allow it to pass, and then it would stand as law. That's what that's saying. And that's how the country would rally. So it's not done through voting, and that's not how we do laws, guys. It's not through voting and referendums. It's done here because here is where it's tested. So it's got to go into its petri dish and be tested. That's what the whole understanding of democracy really is. So here's the slide you've put up about constitutional sovereignty. This is, I'm hoping this is going to really help people as well. So it says a monarch may be denoted sovereign, but the constitutionally bound or symbolic monarch explicitly cedes sovereignty. So sovereignty is the making and enforcing of the laws. So everything I just hopefully explained to you guys has hopefully helped understand how those laws are made. So I hope I don't have to go over it again because it was pretty specific. But if you do get stuck, you know, guys can always watch this back. So sovereignty is the ability to make and enforce laws, and we do it through the jury. And so that's when we test how the legislation has affected us. And if it's enhanced our lives and someone's accused of breaching it, then yes, they will be judged guilty, and they will need to, the jury will decide how that ends up for them. But if that legislation has been a source of suffering for a member of the community, then we say that's not a law, and that's gone. And now whoever's brought that up as a potential law for us, they need to stand before us. And I think I didn't cover whether an act of treason, and I think that's coming. So hopefully that's coming in the slides, because that's going to be important too. So here it says in Articles 24, 39, 40, and 61. So they're out of the 63 articles of the of the 63 articles that are in the 1215 Magna Carta. So anyone who's read that will see that there's an overlap with those 4 articles right there. So we can probably go to the next slide, Carl. So here it is. So sovereignty is the preeminence. So the supreme and independent power expressed through the making and enforcing of laws. So we, the people, are sovereign through the use of trial by jury. That's how we express it. That's how it's manifested in reality. So that's how we get our understanding of natural law and make it happen and manifest it in the physical realm through trial by jury. This is democracy. So I'm hoping that's going to be a little bit easier for people to understand as to what sovereignty means. The act of being sovereign is to actually judge the legislation that's coming out of the government. Because if we can't do that, then we have no control over our lives. We can't be self-determining, right? And so then we're just slaves. So this is the way it's done. So is there another slide that I've got ready, Carl? All right, so if everyone's wondering how we've come to this position where there's so much crime, it's because we didn't have trial by jury. So here it is. Without exception, history shows that all societies bereft of common law, trial by jury, tend inexorably into crime, inequity, and we can see that, right? If we really look properly, we'll see it. Strife, injustice. Now, I'd like to see how many people don't agree with that we're in misery and despotism at the moment. If you can see what's coming down the pike with the WHO, and that digital control structure they've got ready for us. You know, they're just waiting for the interface to finish it off. This is because we never had trial by jury, guys. So the only place it's ever been enshrined is in the 1215 Magna Carta. So anyone who says that it's a relic and it's not relevant to them, well, that means they must be loving misery and despotism, because there's no other mechanism by which you can prove that this has been agreed to by the people. I don't know of any other one. So that's why I wanted to bring that up for people. Was there any more slides that I've got?
No, mate, just the Telegram one. So I don't think there are too many questions. It's certainly been an in-depth one tonight. There's a lot that you've covered in those slides, and quite rightly you say, people, if you've lost track of it, go back and have a bit of a look. This will be live on the site as soon as we finish, and we'll upload it to Project Matilda as well. You wanted to mention your Telegram site too, though.
So I had this suggested to me that it would be worthwhile having a Telegram group where people could actually find each other and try and organize themselves in their local communities. So I created an MC 1215 Magna Carta chat, or network, sorry. Network chat. So it's about networking and finding out who lives near you, and so people can come together, start doing their oaths, and have people to sign and witness their oaths for them, and then move into the notices and have weekly catch-ups where they can do that, so they can get live witnesses, and it has more power if you guys are learning together and supporting each other.
Yeah.
So that's why after that suggestion, I actually thought, yeah, why not? Why not create a group? And so there's only a small number of people on there now. So anyone who's watching, if you want to start networking with others who actually understand this knowledge and are ready to act, so you need to have the courage to actually manifest this, right? This is not just you just understanding. The action's required, guys, because there's something serious coming down the pike. And if we keep staying apathetic, you know, just go, oh, it should be right, someone else will fix it, and, you know, the white hats are going to come do it. If we all start thinking that, well, we've got no power and we've learnt nothing, right? And so you cannot fix a problem with the same thinking that created it, right? So the way that the structure is now is that someone is superior and someone is inferior. Well, if we sit there waiting for someone to come rescue us, that's the same belief system. That's believing there's someone who's superior to us, who knows everything better than us and is coming to rescue us. Well, that's not you showing that you're sovereign. That's you staying a slave. So how do you think, if anyone's coming to rescue you, if you believe that, that means you're giving all your authority and power to them, and they're going to set the terms and conditions by which you live. So nothing's changed. It might be a little bit better for a while, but over time, it'll descend again because the same structure's there. There's someone who's dominant and someone who's inferior. That's pretty much what you're agreeing to if you stay in this belief that the good guys are coming. If you don't stand in your power and actually act and show that you are not a slave with your actions, you are one. It's just that simple. That's what it requires. It requires action, not talk, but action. So that's why the thinking was behind this group, to actually give people a platform by which they can try and find each other, because we want to sort of come up with some kind of survey to see where people are and work out, what states you're from, if you're in this capital city or regions, and then see if we can start helping people group together and come together and actually do their learning together and form into groups. That's kind of the idea, because we need to start growing this organically and across the country. So that's why I put that there. So if anyone's interested, feel free to jump on and join in. So that's why I've got that there. Is there any questions that have come up that you can see that need answering? I'm not spotting it.
A few minds blown by the look of it, and there's a few people, Andrew McCluskey, saying I might have to be watching it back for umpteen times to get it all in. But look, once you get your head around it, it is very easy to understand because it falls naturally. It's something that just it tends to come into you, and you think, oh well, that's just how it should work. That's how things should be. But getting that initial crossover can be mind-blowing. You're quite right. So I'm really wrapped, mate. Tonight we covered a lot of really in-depth areas, and I'm sure that people have got a lot out of it. Let me just have a look. Andrew's got a question here, but if we get out of this situation in the next year or two, what's going to stop these loonies from trying to create a new world order again? Well, trial by jury wouldn't allow that to happen, Andrew. The people would never allow that to be created again. And any organization like the UN or the WHO or the World Economic Forum, which are all born out of the UN, would never be allowed to exist, certainly not in their current format. They'd be much more beneficial to the people rather than just saying they are. I think I'd be correct in that, wouldn't I, Fitz?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to what you've said, the 1215 Magna Carta doesn't interact with any foreign laws. It just can't. Yeah, right. So there couldn't be any UN just coming in and deciding that it can just, decide for us. That would never happen. Our parliament would be under our control through trial by jury. So they would never go and sign any treaties or anything like that because they'd be dead. Simple as that. Yep. I mean, that's just that simple. That's how serious the crime is of treason. So treason is the most serious crime you can commit because it's more serious than murder, because murder is just one person. But this is like outright annihilation of a population. It's the murder of an entire population. And it's done through these legislative laws that they create without us knowing it. That's how they kill us. And you need some evidence. Go look at the stats of what's happening, right? So that would never be allowed to stand. We just wouldn't let any of this pass. As soon as we got a whiff of something being dodgy, they'd be right in front of us, and out they go. And so who would want to take on that job of, risking their life and their family's livelihood? I don't know who would want to do that. So that's why when you can understand that.
Legislation, that's what it is. Death by 1,000 cuts of legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. And there just wouldn't be one cut, just one wouldn't get through because, we're acting from our conscience. So who would allow one thing that stinks out loud? I don't know, unless you're like a government stooge. And those people wouldn't even exist. So, that's why, Andrew, it's not possible. It's watertight. And this trial by jury system is not just here inherent to England. It's actually across all tribes. They ran it the same way. They would select a council of people, somehow called them elders, that had, sound knowledge of their laws, and they would be the ones that would come together to decide how justice would be served. It was never one individual.
This happens with tribes in the Amazon already. Well, or still forever. They've sorted out, their own laws, their own tribal laws, and if somebody breaks those laws, there are consequences. Some of them can be quite severe, banishment and death amongst them. So I don't know that I'd like to be banished out of my tribe into the Amazon wilderness, just between you and the go.
Not me either. So if you have honourable intentions, you would never fear this system. Never. The only ones who would need to fear it are the ones who have dishonourable intention. And so all it's doing is creating accountability structure. So those who have a proclivity to try and get away with crime, they have nowhere to hide. Because remember, the police, wouldn't be police actually, they'll be constables. They're under the control of the people. So the mechanism that we'd have to make sure that things don't get out of line, we are in charge of. So it couldn't be, they're just getting arrested. Anyone who was a member of parliament that had any ill intent, see you later.
Thank you and good night. Yep.
So
great way for it to be.
It just wouldn't happen. So it just requires, unfortunately, it requires a big conceptual leap. That's the problem, right? Because we're so conditioned to this kind of life. Very few can really make that big leap, that conceptual leap. It requires you to really stimulate your, what's the word I'm after here? Your creativity, all right? And really imagine how that could actually look, because that's what it requires, guys. Because nothing happens unless you use your imagination. No invention happened without imagination. So we need to start activating our imagination and really manifesting it now.
Absolutely.
That's what it's going to require.
Well, Daniel's already wants to line up for the execution of job again. Thank you, Daniel. You'll be standing beside me, and Ricardo Bosi is at the head.
Well, I'm pleased there'll be no shortage.
Oh no, there's plenty of us there. We'll be either swing the axe or pull the lever on the rope, whatever works. Pull the trigger. We're not fussy. Fitz, thanks again. Forward to doing it all again next Monday night at 7:30 well, this is starting to become quite popular, and thank you to everybody who's making contact to us through Project Matilda. I've had Colleen, I think she's approached you as well with some advice.
Yep, that's correct.
She's going through it, or her son's going through something in Victoria at the moment. So sure, look, find us, send us a question. If we can help, we're glad to. Study up. We'll be back at the same time next week. Fitz, once again, thank you very much for joining us.
I did want to just say, like and subscribe. I'm doing it for you. So maybe you want to do that as well. So because it's quite important we get more people up.
Aussie Cossack's been in jail for a week and a half now, or 2 weeks, and we've forgotten about it. So yes, like and subscribe, please, folks. They've kicked us off the other channel, so we've got 2 more that I'm running on YouTube at the moment, and we'll be getting up on Project Matilda soon. I believe the streaming service will be up in a couple of weeks. Daniel was telling me. So with a bit of luck, that'll all happen very soon too. So thanks, folks. Thanks for joining us, and Fitz, looking forward to next Monday night again.
Yeah, just quickly before I go, I did want to mention on the Telegram page that's up here, there are also information on trial by jury. There's stuff on the history of the deception. There's also the Restoration Amendment. So there's actually documents you can download that have got solid knowledge. And I would just want to thank one of the admins for putting that on. So Peter, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Extending my gratitude to you for doing that. So there is also info you can draw from there as well, guys. It's not just a meetup, but there will be specific. And one more thing, it's only about learning, guys. So if you want to come and on that page and actually start talking about all the problems and the things that you're worried about are coming down the pike, we don't focus on that, because all that does is it activates people's trauma. And when you're activating trauma, you can't actually think straight and you can't focus into a solution. So you can do that on other pages, guys, no problem. But on this page, this is all solution focused, and us standing in our power of how to organize ourselves to follow through with the remedy. So I just wanted to make that clear that if you do start posting on this page things that are irrelevant, it will get deleted. All right. So if you are coming onto the page, please come on because you want the solution, you're ready, you're fired up to act.
Excellent. All right, mate. See you 7:30 next Monday night.
I'm looking forward to it.